second day of this conflict.
They keep telling us that they want aid.
And this is what's left of it.
Tanks, heavy vehicle.
Why only in America?
People want their country to work.
Just want a job in a normal life.
Why are these homes empty?
I want you to be honest with people.
That has happened within minutes.
Sky News, the full story first. Free wherever you get your news.
Here we go. Well, this is Sky News. In just a moment, the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. First, though, our top stories. And the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, has arrived in Washington tonight. News just in there, saying the UK does not seek any conflict with Russia. He was speaking after President Putin said allowing Ukraine to use Western weapons to fire deep into his country would mean their direct participation in the war. Well, earlier in the day, the Prime Minister said there would be no new money for the NHS without reform after a stark review laid bare the health service's problems. And Donald Trump has declared that he will not participate in any further debates with White House rival Kamala Harris ahead of November's election. Well, hello there, watching the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. Time then to see what's making the headlines with the broadcaster and commentator Andreou and the former Conservative Special Advisor Salma Shah. Great to see both of you. So let's see what's on the front pages then, starting with the Times. It leads with the war in Ukraine and a stark message from President Putin that the US and Britain will be at war with Russia if they let Ukraine use long-range missiles inside the country. The Guardian also covering this, carrying remarks made by the Prime Minister on his way to Washington in response to that threat. He said Russia illegally started the war and can end it any time. The Telegraph carries a warning from the Foreign Secretary about what is at stake. He said it's vital that Ukraine receives the weapons it needs ahead of what will be a pivotal winter of fighting. The Eye, meanwhile, reporting on new junk food advertising restrictions, which will come into force next October as part of the plan to save the NHS, with the aim of shielding children from obesity and the harms of processed food. Daily Mail also covering that story, giving Sir Keir Starmer a new nickname. The Metro calls rock star Jon Bon Jovi a guitar hero after he persuaded a distraught woman not to jump off a bridge. The Financial Times carries the warnings from the Office for Budget Responsibility that public spending needs to be brought under control, or else the debt generated by it could one day be 3 times higher than the UK's GDP. And without explaining why, the Star's front page tells us that rubbing a wooden chair can reduce stress. I always touch wood. Anyway, a reminder, by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you listen to our guests. Let's head to Alex and Salma then. Some big stories to talk about. Sir Keir Starmer, we've got pictures of him on the flight to Washington. The news that he's just landed. He has a critical meeting with Joe Biden tomorrow amidst a warning from Putin about the use of US and UK long-range missiles fired from Ukraine into Russia, Salma.
I don't think anybody can deny that this is an important moment in diplomatic relations in relation to this conflict. I think what's interesting is this discussion is happening between Britain and the US, and Putin feels the need to intervene here and talk about this threat of escalation, which is something that we have all feared. Is there any move that would create hostility to the point where he could potentially use nuclear weapons in this conflict? So I think there's bated breath around that issue. I think what is apparent from all the reporting that we're seeing as well is that this is not an easy decision. We know that there's been stalling from Kiev in terms of their advancement against Russia. We know that there is no end game in sight for this conflict yet, so nobody wants the tensions to rise. But I certainly think that the fact that the British Prime Minister has gone over to discuss this with the US President makes this a big moment.
I mean, the really fundamental question is, would Russia deem it was at war with the UK and the US? And that is a big thing to chat about in the Oval Office or elsewhere, isn't it?
Yeah, and we've been trying to find the other times this has been threatened, and there's been a few. In June, Russia threatened something similar. In February, Russia threatened something similar. And I find now that in December 2023, Russia threatened strikes into Western countries if F-16s were based on NATO bases. And then in April that year, it threatened nuclear strikes if F-16s were provided. And in the spring of 2022, it threatened nuclear escalation if tanks were given to Ukraine. So the rhetoric, I mean, you never know when he means it and when a mistake might happen that actually does provoke an escalation. But this kind of hawkish rhetoric has been with us for a long time.
And that is why Bradleys, Abrams, Challenger 2s, F-16s, you name it, whatever it is, has been delayed to Ukraine. And in a sense, that hawkish rhetoric has worked against the West. So what makes the difference now that they deem these long-range missiles to be fired into Russia would make a difference to Ukraine?
Well, there's a strategic calculation, which is how badly do we need to win, or how badly do we need to be able to bring Putin to the negotiating table where we're willing to come to some kind of settled or some kind of settlement. But I also think that, I mean, if you will, we'll move on to it, but sort of the Foreign Secretary's interview in the Telegraph, he's a lot more sort of strident with the rhetoric about we cannot let Ukraine lose. So I think it's important to ask yourself the strategic question on what does victory look like, or what does a settlement look like?
I think there's been two things have happened recently. The first one is the uncertainty over the US election. I think that has really put a fire under leaders to push for a quick resolution, because they don't know what happens after January if we're looking at a Trump White House. And that's obviously preying on everyone's mind. And the second is, I feel there's been a change of tone in the rhetoric from the European Union. I think in the summits we've had recently, most notably the first one after Labour came into power, there was a sense that this drag was actually costing European economies a lot more money than going for a quick and decisive resolution. This drip that was basically guaranteeing
But here's the other part of it, which is the situation in Moscow is quite difficult to read as well, because we hear of stories about Putin's regime being destabilised, his trusted advisors being moved away, more family members coming into those key functions in government. So there is also this difficult element of trying to understand whether his desperation will lead to something more dramatic in terms of his reaction to our decisions, or whether actually we're talking about an endgame scenario, and that is not clear, and it certainly will not be clear even with all the intelligence at the US and British government's disposal.
Yes, the Guardian quoting what they called a plain huddle. We've seen the pictures already. Salma tells Putin, you started this war, you can end it any time. And asked on the flight, whether the UK, well, he said the UK does not seek any conflict with Russia. That is not our intention in the slightest. Mr. Putin, of course, just to quote everybody, said that allowing long-range strikes would mean that NATO countries, the United States, the European countries are at war with Russia. That is a stark thing to say. But
this is about going into Russian territory. And so one of the examples that you just cited, Alex, was in reaction to Kiev's forces moving into Crimea, which then obviously had become Russian territory at this point. And so this is also about the fact that the integrity of Russia and its borders could be compromised. That is going to be a very difficult thing for Putin to be able to explain away internally. And if there is that sort of rising challenge to him as an individual in his position, then you can see why this is a bigger deal for him.
More quotes from Sir Keir Starmer. They started this conflict and Ukraine's got a right to self-defence. To reiterate, it was Russia who started this in the first place. They caused the conflict. They're the ones who are acting unlawfully, and Ukraine obviously has the right to self-defence. That is why we've been providing training and capability, etc., etc. We know Storm Shadows have been fired into places like Crimea, for example, but why wait until a plane carrying, weapons gets into Ukrainian airspace before it can be targeted? That's the question people are asking.
Because there is a ratcheting, I think. There is a sort of aggressive move met by an aggressive response. It is then left to calm down a little bit, and half an aggressive move is made. That's what we've seen, you know, because the F-16s maybe didn't go into Ukraine at that point, but they went into the Ukrainian conflict 3 months, 4 months later. So that's what happens. It's this weird cha-cha of war, one step forward, one step back. And the one thing you can say for certain right now, prosaic as it might be, is that the pieces are moving around the board right now. We're not entirely clear what the situation will be once they've assumed the new positions, but there is movement.
OK, we'll keep an eye on it. We'll hear and see more of Sir Keir Starmer alongside Joe Biden, obviously, on Friday. Perhaps more pictures later as well. In the meantime, let's go to the Daily Telegraph. Their story that low-paid migrant workers are an immediate drain on the public purse, with each one, the paper tells us, costing taxpayers more than £150,000 by the time they hit state pension age. And this is the Office for Budget Responsibility.
Well, Alex is an economist by trade.
Right.
And we were discussing this earlier when the papers arrived. And actually, he changed my view on the story. So I'd love you to sort of explain the detail behind the story.
I'm first and foremost a migrant, and that, I think, is what changed your view. The Telegraph treats those OBR figures as if they are forever. People's lives are not linear. Someone arrives low-skilled, just as I did in 1990, but also studying at the same time, improving my English. Then I had a slightly better job while I went to university. Then I graduated from university and had a much better job that paid a lot of tax into the system. So the idea that someone arrives low-skilled and then stays low-skilled until they're of pensionable age is not realistic. That's not how people's lives work, basically. And if you look further into the piece, you find out that while low-paid migrants are a drain on public finances, the OBR found that the average migrant worker paid more in tax than they received in public services compared with British-born workers, mainly because they were not educated in the UK, which makes perfect sense to me. And so isn't that what we should look at, on average, whether a migration economy is working for us or not, I guess.
OK. We have so much to pack in. We've overrun. We will come to junk food advertising as part of the preventative healthcare plans that we've heard from the government today. Also, what is it like to take a spacewalk when you're not actually an astronaut? Talk about that as well.
I'm Mark Stone and I'm Sky's correspondent based here in Washington, D.C.
Wall Street! High Street!
Well, the plan seems to be to head to the police station where the policeman who fired the shots was based.
And everything, you know, his memories is all gone.
In almost every corner, this town has been completely destroyed by the fire. I've witnessed a remarkable passion for politics here, but the anger too.
Trump out of the White House.
Is this the moment to reform gun laws?
You know, it's easy to go to politics.
But it's important. It's at the heart of the issue.
I get that that's where the media likes to go.
No, it's not. It's where many of the people we've talked to here like to go.
I report on the biggest stories from around the world. This is a town that is effectively encircled by the Russians.
You say it's all fabrication, what's happening in Bucha?
Destroyed my nation.
We take you to the heart of stories that shape our planet. I can hear now quite a few explosions in the distance here in Jerusalem. A very violent series of confrontations here. What do you think of ISIS?
Everybody here knows the truth of ISIS.
I'm Lisa Dowd and I'm Sky's Midlands correspondent. We can reveal that the driver who hit Harry Dunn is 42-year-old Anne Sakoulas.
Just met the president and we never thought we'd get this far.
This is what they're up against, is back-breaking work. Water levels are dropping, but no one knows what impact further rain will have.
What would you do if this place wasn't open?
We take you to the heart of the stories that shape our world.
It's really scary.
In this community, I'm told that everybody knows someone affected by COVID. Change seems tantalisingly close in this corner of the UK. This is my patch, my specialism. It's also my home.
This conflict.
They keep telling us that they want aid.
And this is what's left of it.
Tanks, heavy vehicle.
Why only in America?
People want their country to work.
You want a job in a normal life.
Why are these homes empty?
I want you to be honest with people.
That has happened within minutes.
Sky News, the full story first. Free wherever you get your news.
Welcome back. You are watching the press preview with me once again, Alex, Andreou and Salma Shah. Welcome back to both of you. Alex, junk food TV ad ban before 9 p.m. We heard the focus today after the Lord Darcy report about preventative medicine. Does that fit into that scheduling then?
It does fit into that scheduling, but more like displacement activity than actual action. It's like we haven't got the money or a plan yet to tackle all the big things, so we're going to do this little thing instead, just to look busy.
I mean, this has been talked about for ages, hasn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, remind me.
I mean, a big thing about this is how do you define junk food? That's the first massive hurdle, right? Because if you're going down the route of what they call ultra-processed food, then like a lot of vegan stuff that we consider quite healthy and that actually is not bad for you is ultra-processed. So does that include seitan or tofu?
See, now you're having a very interesting, serious policy discussion. The thing that struck me about this is that this was Boris Johnson's. This is Boris Johnson's idea. And I think that was also shelved previously, partly because they weren't sure about the impact of it, and partly because, it was, as the Mail says here, nanny state-ish. And I am not, that kind of conservative that's really anti the nanny state. I think there's place for good regulation. But, as the Mail says in its comment piece, do you really want to say to Mr. Kipling you're not allowed to try and market your cakes so somebody can have a treat at tea time? But it is about the difference between having a treat at tea time that's something sugary and ultra-processed versus having a terrible diet. And I'm not sure that junk food advertising bans deal with the really holistic issue of the fact that people's diets, people's exercise is really poor.
Tooth decay, young children, that's why they're in hospital. It's all part
I mean, the only thing I'd counter to that, first of all, I'm an old-style socialist. You get actual nannies. We quite like a nanny state because that's the only nanny we'll ever get. And the thing is to nudge the industry, I think, towards better choices. So if you want to be advertised before the water set, exactly, reduce the amount of fat in your product, or reduce the amount of salt in your product, and make it so that it doesn't go into this category where it's really bad for kids or whatever. So I think it's more targeted at the industry rather than, like, when they targeted sugar in fizzy drinks, what you saw immediately was that the sugar content of fizzy drinks dropped dramatically across the board.
It was actually my policy area where we did that in government.
I know, that's why I brought it up, to butter you up, you see.
That's why she's all about questioning results. That's the point, isn't it, really? Let us move on to the Financial Times, this amazing footage we saw today of this spacewalk. People have suggested walk is an exaggeration of what happened. But anyway, nonetheless, you have citizen astronaut poking his head out in the vacuum of space, in a brand new spacesuit, in a brand new everything, all sort of experimental. You know, brave, foolhardy, you name it. He's a billionaire, satisfying a billionaire's craving to get to Mars.
I mean, and I guess I might have an objection about it on moral grounds, but actually he was essentially a volunteer member of staff testing out a new suit. So in those circumstances, I don't have... It seems like quite a good synergy, basically. The company's getting someone to pay them to do a job that they would have to send someone else to do out there anyway, and so that makes sense to me. But, yeah, it seems a lot of money to basically just go out the sunroof. Because I mean, that's what happened.
Look, even the late Stephen Hawking said we had to find another planet in 100 years. So,
well,
you know.
yeah, I mean, Mars seems like the optimum place to go, but I'll tell you something, you're not getting me up there, tethered or not tethered, not a chance.
Yeah. Loads of stories we haven't got to. We will have to persist with our efforts. Alex and Salma, thank you both very much indeed. Thank you. Now, to the weather then. A northerly flow is bringing a taste of autumn. You've probably noticed it already. Turn milder, though, for the weekend. A mostly dry and cold start to Friday. An extensive ground frost and local air frost in the countryside. UK staying mainly sunny and dry through the morning. Scotland and East Anglia will see isolated showers. Ireland will be largely fine too, but cloud will increase from the west by lunchtime. So temperatures will remain a little below average. It'll feel a bit warmer than previous days, especially in the sunshine. The afternoon will bring a little rain to northwest Ireland and the Western Isles on strengthening winds elsewhere, staying largely fine into the evening. Well, Sky News at 11 is next. Our press preview continues. Sir Keir Starmer has arrived in Washington, saying the UK does not seek any conflict with Russia.
I say, bring it on.
With America divided and tensions running high, get ready for an election like no other.
Join our teams as we follow the campaign trail as America decides.
We will win, win, win.
Get closer to the action this US election with full reaction and analysis.
Sky News, the full story first.
It's 11 o'clock. This is Sky News' extended press preview, our top story. The Prime Minister arrives in Washington for talks with the US President as Vladimir Putin delivers a new warning shot about Ukraine. Also this evening, no more money without reform. Sir Keir Starmer holds out hope of an NHS lifeline, but says it will take a decade to deliver. No more debates, declares Donald Trump after a televised clash that polls suggest he lost to Kamala Harris.
Back at home, we all have a lot of work to do, but from here, Earth sure looks like a perfect world.
And looking at Earth, dreaming of Mars, the billionaire's spacewalk, which could bring Elon Musk's mission a step closer. Well, over the next hour, we will be discussing today's news with our reviewers, Andreou and Salma Shah. And later, we'll have a full run-through for you of tomorrow's front pages. Hello there, good evening. Sir Keir Starmer has arrived in Washington tonight. And when he speaks to President Joe Biden tomorrow, some of the most hawkish comments yet from President Putin are likely to hang over their meeting. The Russian leader tonight said that if Ukraine is allowed to strike inside Russia using weapons like Britain's Storm Shadow, it would mean the direct participation of those countries in the war.
If this decision is taken, it will mean nothing less than the direct involvement of NATO countries, the United States and European countries in the war in Ukraine. This will be their direct participation, and this, of course, will significantly change the very essence, the very nature of the conflict. This will mean that NATO countries, the US and European countries are at war with Russia. And if this is so, meaning the essence of the conflict changed, we will take the respective decisions corresponding to the threats we are facing.
Well, over the next hour, we will bring you tonight's headlines, tomorrow's front pages and the views of our paper reviewers, the broadcaster and commentator Andreou and the former Conservative Special Advisor Salma Shah. First of all, let's go live to our chief political correspondent John Craig in Westminster. John, we've already been issued those photographs of Keir Starmer doing that plane huddle on his flight to Washington, already making comments, but with the threat, this threat from President Putin ringing no doubt in his ears.
On his way to Washington, the Prime Minister hit back. He told reporters on the plane that Russia started this conflict. Russia illegally invaded Ukraine. Russia could end this conflict straight away. He said they started this conflict. Ukraine has got a right to self-defence. He went on to say that the UK didn't seek any conflict with Russia. That's not our intention in the slightest. Now, his meeting with President Biden in the White House, his second visit to the White House in just a few short months since he became Prime Minister, has effectively become a war summit now because it's going to be obviously dominated by the plea from President Zelensky of Ukraine to United States and the UK to lift restrictions on these long-range UK and US weapons being fired at targets in Russia. Now, up to now, the United States in particular has taken the view that if that restriction were to be lifted and the go-ahead was to be given, that would escalate the conflict. What has changed is, of course, according to